They say, that's what I thought they got. Trying to think who were our authors before 1920.
Well, I'm just thinking of the scientist Benjamin Banneker.
Benjamin Banneker. I don't think so. But wow, maybe this is a tough one. So I can tell that you also need to pick up George because if you had read the first volume, then you would have read an essay that Samuel R. Delany. He's not the first, but he is, considered definitely a pioneer. He published in 1962 when he was only 19. However, he wrote an essay that explores some of our early contributors, and he mentions this author in his essay. No.
Questions or two?
Oh, you know.
Martin R. Delany?
Martin R. Delany, that's right.
Okay, you have to enlighten us about Martin R. Delany.
Martin R. Delany is no relation to Samuel R. Delany, but he is considered to be the father of black nationalism. He was writing for Philadelphia newspapers. He's a journalist. He was also part of the Back to Africa movement then, and had visited West Africa himself. He visited Nigeria and wrote travel memoirs about his visits there, and was kind of instrumental in getting that conversation happening in the 1850s. And so a book that he wrote, his novel was called Blake or the Huts of America, was published serially in, I think it was the Philadelphia Tribune or the Philadelphia Inquirer, one of the early black newspapers.
Anglo-African.
Anglo-African?
Anglo-African
Anglo-African newspaper. And it's actually in print. You can still publish it. Read it today. It's just called Blake or the Huts of America. And it kind of did explore a successful slave uprising that took over not only the South, but also Cuba as well. So you should check that out.
Okay, the next book is actually the Wu-Tang Manual. I'm not so sure how many people will be into it. Actually, I did. I'll be honest with you. I actually did skim through it, and you read about Master Killer and the RZA and ODB and Ghostface Killer, and it's interesting. I'll go that far. So whoever answers this next question will get this book. And perhaps they'll find someone else who will be able to see it.
Let me see the back picture.
All right, what's the second question?
Okay, we're going to do this Jeopardy style, okay?
What is? And the answer has to...
These two African-American authors, science fiction authors, were the first to earn the MacArthur Genius Awards.
Octavia Butler and Samuel Delany.
You got one of them right.
Were Octavia Butler and Walter Mosley?
No. Octavia Butler is one of the answers. Anyone else?
Gloria Neela?
No.
No clue.
I'll give you a clue. She is known for her young adult literature and her folk tales. The People Could Fly.
Belle Hooks?
Oh, Virginia
No.
Hamilton.
Virginia Hamilton. That's right. You are.
She already owns this book.
You are.
Actually, you can give it to one of your students.
I could.
All right, there you go.
All right. I always love to talk about Virginia Hamilton because we know her work for children, but some of her work for children was definitely science fiction. The Justice and Her Brother trilogy, that series is straight up science fiction. And so she's one of the first, her and Octavia. All right, it's a pleasure to be with you today. It's really, I feel like I'm just coming full circle, and that circle has been really challenging, amazing, but also extremely rewarding. I don't know if Troy remembers, but he was like one of my first New York credits in terms of book reviewing. I reviewed I believe it was Nana Hudson's book.
Oh, that's right.
For
Brown Girl in the Rain.
African American Literature
Yeah.
Book Club, her first book, Brown Girl in the Rain. And I had no idea that I would end up being published along with her as well. So that was really wonderful. But Dark Matter, Reading the Bones is the second book. We published it last year here, and the very first story that's in it was one that it stuck with me for some time. I read the book, I read the novel that it's based on. It's Igbo Landing by Esau Gracie. And it was just so beautifully written. It's lyrical. It's just, it encompasses so much history. It's a middle passage tale, but so much more than that. It's a personal history as well of your family. That it just stuck with me. And I think you're going to enjoy hearing a little bit today. So we're going to get started. All right. Well, this is Esau Gracie of Brooklyn.
There you go.
Right. And Esau is very modest, but when the book was reviewed, its story was singled out, among others, as some of the most memorable works in the collection. So really was pleased how his work reached others outside of us.
First I have to say, Ashe, Olodumare, and I go like Igbo Landing is basically the tale of my family and their journey. It's short stories and their journey through to now. We pick it up at the Middle Passage, which is what Igbo Landing is about. The piece is written for Yemaya, who is the Orisha of the water that you can see, the top of the water. And I want to give a shout out. It was first published by Kubro Press, and it's still available. So, okay. And this piece is called Igbo Landing. It's, I think, based off of the first Going Home tale. That from the slaves, from the Africans who were brought across during the Middle Passage and enslaved. So this is called Igbo Landing. They would not remove themselves from his mind. He dreamt of them. They would not remove themselves from his mind. He dreamt of them, of her every night. They all did. The mass of human flesh lay beached upon the shore. In the pale, early dawn, they were indistinguishable. They were poured upon the sands, fished out of nets like pounds of shrimp. As his eyes adjusted to light, he could make out land. He wondered, as he watched the ghost move about, what special hell he had been brought. He would never forget the sound of teeth gnashing as she gave herself to the sea. She gave herself to the sea. There was no struggle. She sensed him behind her. She reached back as his hand found hers. She squeezed it tight. She had only time to grab him before being engulfed by waters. Raspberry heard the unloading all night. As the sun began to rise, he could make out the mound of brown and human flesh on the shore, and the shadow of the ship beyond. He could feel people all around him. He had grown used to the communal form. He had lost the parameters of his own body just as he had given up the designs of his soul. It took all his effort to open his eyes. For so long it had seemed so useless. confined to the shadows and darkness as he had been. Ghosts moved about freely, unconcerned for their cargo. There was the sense of exhilaration and completion that came at the end of each crossing. Satisfaction, having delivered over half of their cargo safely. They waited for the auction and the payment of their money. As the sun rose, the mound began to move. Warned as they were by the sun, they no longer clung to each other. As the thaw of the journey and last night's unloading set in, the cold subsided. They each began to take back their limbs. They all remembered Hiobe's screams among those of the other woman the ghost had chosen. Hiobe had been taken for the longest, passed around as she was. No one had seen her for 2 risings of the moon. They had begun to think of her as lost when she returned, bloody, taken, wet with the pollution of many ghosts. She cried until she fell asleep. Then she screamed until she woke to cry. A diva saw her from one corner of the vessel. She saw him. He saw it in the look in her eyes. She knew it in his. By the time he reached the railing, she had already leaped. He focused on where the waters had withdrawn her. He eluded the hands of many ghosts reaching. He jumped after. Sharks that followed the ship of death continued in the process of their evolution, cleansing the waste and filth. Drawn as they were by the blood of her taking, and the remains of the communal blood in which they had lain. They all remembered. It would not escape their dreams. Slowly, they returned to life. Scared, scarred by the passage. They had crossed. They were the bridge. Generations would cross through their collective womb. Each in their own way understood the distance. They would never again be home. There were many tongues, many people among them. Most were still chained. Slowly they were released into a pen, washed, clothed, and given some gruel to eat, passed by ladle, by ghosts, from one communal pail. As they released, they drifted together in the communal pen. It was here that for the first time many of them were able to find the sister tongues they had heard in the darkness. That darkness, lying one upon the other, barely breathing, constant in the shifting and the struggle for room. All would not survive. It had seemed an eternity before the one voice called out for silence. Those of this tongue indicated this to each who was near. In this way, slowly, the silence had been achieved. Calling the name of a people, those of that tongue would cry out, searching for information, a sound, a name, a place, anything familiar, any vestige of their ever-distancing home. It was on that day when a young warrior saw to urge the people to learn the sounds of the one in bondage beside them, and resistance was born. Resistance which gave birth to survival. So many died. So many gave themselves to the sea. Amazingly, the eyes adapted to darkness, to whatever little light surrendered itself through the virtually non-existent openings in the belly of the wooden ship. Next had come the arduous task of moving, each day at least one shift. As the voyage continued, there had been more room. There had been death left to rot amongst them. And they had lost so many fluids everywhere, from every opening of the living, the dying, and the dead. This was the constant in which they survived. 1/4 of the cargo was brought above each day, fed, drenched in the waters of the sea, made to move, dance, then return to the continent. Methodology developed by the success of many crossings. Among them were the people who did not speak. The people of the silence could hear the thoughts of one another. They alone knew the fate of each cargo hold. Sativa had known each of Keopi's thoughts through every screen. They all had. They waited until the washing was complete. The morning moon watched. Slowly they turned and began walking back toward the water. Movement was undetected for several moments. Their guard was down. They had passed the night. The cargo had been washed, fed, clothed, and pinned. Auction was set for high sun. The pins were guarded heaviest on the side near the woods, near where the auction would take place. The slavers held the hill overlooking their prized cargo. It was a while before they noticed the silent band of 30 or more moving without hesitation towards the water. As they reached the line, the limits of the pin, they jumped it as one. They turned not ahead. Even as the sounds of agitation grew behind them, they quickly crossed the distance of the natural harbor. The slavers were stunned. Cautious, they sprang into action. Quickly they realized they could cut off every path except the one which led to the water. They reached for their guns, but were confused, fearful to injure even a single piece of cargo, if it could be helped. Suddenly angry, they contemplated their loss. As if breaking out of a dream state, the slavers suddenly broke into a panicked run, each cursing non-stop, blaspheming their God and their luck. Then they suddenly stopped, silent by what they saw but could not comprehend. Raspberry watched from the hill. It was through him that the story was remembered and the truth told. As they reached the place of wave, each one would grab the hand of the one before. And stepping over wave after wave, they strode confidently, unhurriedly, past the ship lying in the darkness. Nearly everyone in the vicinity of Evo Landing that day came to see before the silent band was lost from sight.
Thank you. Did you all have any questions for Isan? Any questions for Brother Isan? When you make that move, you across the water today too, huh?
Oh yeah.
You said this was based on a tale?
Oh yeah, Raspberry was my great grandfather. I think it's 2 greats. So it's actually, it's really a common ancestry, but the going home tale, there's a couple of them. One is, I think, who is it? Toni Morrison talks about in the Song of Solomon, about Solomon flying home and taking the children. I think the Evo Landing one predates even that, as one of the tales that was passed down about a bunch of Ebos that walked home. And there's actually a marker in the South Carolina and Georgia Sea Islands where Evo Landing is. Unfortunately, it's still owned by some white folks. And so there's been a political movement to try to make that a national monument for the Africans who came across. And Geechee, or the Gullah Island, they are actually trying to make that a national African American language, because so many slaves from so many parts of Africa were brought through there, and so the language became somewhat of a common.
So how old were you when you first heard the story?
I don't even remember.
Was it always there?
Yeah, but that's the way I remember it, is just always being there, My father is Geechee, which means he was born in the Gullah Islands, and if you stay in the Gullah Islands, you're Gullah. Once you leave for any reason, then you become Geechee. So there's a whole lot of Geechees everywhere. And then there's a few Gullahs, I guess, that are still left. And my mother's people were from the the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. They came through the other port, and so then, you know, and so basically the book which Cool Grove Press first printed is a travelogue, I guess, starting in Africa, and it's kind of a dream sequence of being caught, and then, or actually not being caught, but fighting instead.
Why did you decide to make the oral into a written history?
My children. You know, I was just simply afraid that, I know myself, we used to go down to Virginia every summer. So from like 5 to like 15 or something. So that's why I learned to say yes ma'am. And you know, and it's so funny because walking in Virginia, you know, people will stop me and say, "You one of the Lewis children." I don't know which one, but you one of the Lewis, you know, because I guess I shaped like my grandfather, apparently, my great grandfather. Yeah, there you go. So actually, Raspberry had to be my great grandfather.
I just want to say thank you. This is my second time hearing you read, and I want to say thank you because one of my interests is people preserving the oral history so they can pass it on and not have it forgotten.
Right.
And so the way that you do it is a way that's accessible for people in different ways. And at the same time, it was very beautiful, and it really hits right here. So thank you.
Respect. Yeah, it's like when my kids didn't have the opportunity I had of being down in Virginia every summer, and that's like with the family compound. I have 49 first cousins. And well, my grandmother had 13 kids, so there was, you know, so it was a very serious little clan action. And I would go down there and stay for 2 months, and I guess that the aunts and uncles would drop off their kids and pick them up, you know, during the summer, depending on what their vacation was. You know, but again, my grandmother, Big Mama, she held us together that way, you know, and through that I learned a lot. You know, I also, you know, remember sitting at the back of the bus and having to sit in the balcony, you know, at the movie theater because the integration, Virginia was the last state to desegregate. They did it basically most peaceful, but it was the last state, the border state, I guess. So, yeah, I remember my father getting furious because my mother had let me go to the movies. And then I was only 5, but I had to sit at the back of the bus and I had to sit in the balcony. There was no bathroom in the balcony, no concession stand, you know, and my father was just furious that I guess that he couldn't protect me from that, and that my mother had allowed me to go with the rest of my cousins and to get to experience that. So, yeah, it's been an interesting time.
Thank you. Are there any other
Respect.
questions?
Oh yes, the music was by Michael Ray. And I guess the last thing I need to say is that Evo Landing has been optioned to go to Broadway. That's a long process. But it has been optioned by the Mirror Rep Company, so.
Good luck.
Would you mind signing some books before you?
Sure.
Right. So we're gonna have like a short intermission. Is that all right? No? Okay.
Can we purchase it
During this time, Sherry?
Sherry.
Oh, after, because I'm just gonna give it to him to sign, because he's got another engagement.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, I did forget, I did.
South Carolina to Georgia area. So
That's right.
Oh, Shereen. Yeah, Shereen knows all my numbers, so she can do.
my name is Mary, just in case
Mary?
NYU student.
Usually I have my girls.
I know, you will. I know you got me today, so thank you for coming.
You got extra? Yeah, we usually get my son like that. Real? Thank you. I really, I was still better than I don't get
Yeah. So.
Of college, and there was a panel, or two panels. We were on one, Dark Matter. The other panel was on reparations. And Randall Robinson was there along with another gentleman. And Randall Robinson, of course, spoke on behalf of reparations. And another gentleman was speaking against. And it was such a provocative panel. It just set my mind on fire. I just had so many questions that it just stayed with me. So when I got back to New York, got back to Frederick Douglass, one of the things that I wonder is, like, I wonder if, what some of our writers would have to say, like if there's a way of us addressing this issue in a creative form. So I think I made it an assignment.
You
right?
did make an assignment.
I made it an assignment. And of course, we started working on the logistics, like how can this happen, and da-da-da-da. And so I said, okay, cut all the foolishness, all right? Okay, a bill has passed, a reparations bill has passed. Write your story from that perspective, like the bill has passed. And Jill was one of the writers who really rose to the challenge and put her thoughts on the page. So without any further ado, I want you to hear from Blackout by Jill Robinson.
That's a comfortable chair.
And I can just start at any time?
Yes.
Okay. And this is just an excerpt. I've pieced together a few different pieces of the story. I love Alana. I just wish she didn't live in Harlem. My Brooklyn ass is tired of making the hour trip uptown just to get some. If it wasn't for her, I would have been in Flatbush when the news broke, instead of standing here on this train platform, feeling for the first time like an outsider amongst my own kind. Reparations, brother, someone shouted, patting me on the back. They were shouting, frantically congratulating each other, celebrating the passing of S9821, the reparations bill that promises to compensate American citizens of African descent for years of unpaid slave labor. I have no reason to celebrate. I have been deemed ineligible. Hello, I said, walking closer to the train exit to get better cell phone reception. Nigel, it's Alana. I didn't answer. I was still fuming from our argument earlier this morning. Nigel, can you hear me? I heard her sigh, but I still didn't answer. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be so insensitive, I said, coming to her rescue. What you said was insensitive, beyond insensitive. What, you think just because my parents are Jamaican that I don't deserve reparations too? Now she was quiet. I leaned against a poster of an enlarged subway map and waited for her to speak. 2 trains had come and gone. I was already late for work. You said it'd be a woman to stand behind it, I said, egging her on. She sighed. I meant, look, I have slave ancestors on one side of my family, so I'm going to at least get half of the 40 million. That's enough for both me and you to do what we want to... No thanks, I said to Alana. To both Alana and the man passing out free t-shirts with a mule on the front and the words 40 acres on the back. Come on, Nigel, you can borrow some to finance your film. Borrow? I immediately cut her off. Which half of you is going to submit the claim, the white half or the black half? Or are you still holding on to other? She hung up. I knew that would end the conversation. I don't even feel like going to work anymore. The whole white office will be talking about, or trying not to talk about, the bill. Ever since it was introduced, my white coworkers and I tiptoe together, making small talk about current events, but always careful not to mention what its opponents call the guilt bill. It's been 6 months and 4 days since the reparations bill was enacted into law. Since that time, I've come to hate any black American as defined by the language in the guilt bill. American-born descendants of black African slaves purchased and owned for use in the United States of America. Up in Harlem, they hate us sugarcane West Indians, and down here in Brooklyn, we hate them cotton-picking niggers. The only thing we seem to agree on these days is that the entire bill is one big catch-22. I've been familiarizing myself with the provisions of the appropriations process. I want to be thoroughly informed for the upcoming Senate hearings, which are being held in response to what the white supremacy groups have coined the blackout. Africans, West Indians, mulattoes, octoroons, Native Americans, what, you think they're not part of us? Spanish-speaking people of all color? And all others conveniently excluded from America's so-called apology are refusing to work. I compare my notes to what President Duffy is saying during her emergency television broadcast. Ineligible. Any persons with ancestors who were free at any time before the enactment of the Emancipation Proclamation. Any persons whose parents or grandparents were not born in the United States of America. Any person who has or whose parents have been engaged in any anti-government activities or activities that threaten the national security of the U.S., e.g., members of the Nation of Islam, Black Panthers, and draft dodging. Any persons who have lived outside the U.S. for a period of time exceeding 2 years for reasons other than military duty or employment assignments. The more the President talks, the more she rationalizes the provisions for the eligibility, the more I realize that America never meant to truly repay us for its sins.
All right, Jill, what was the hardest thing about writing this story?
I didn't want to write it. That was the first thing. I had nothing to say about the reparations bill. And I guess the more I thought about it, I just felt like even I'm, you know, not that I guess I'm being pessimistic. I just never believed that will ever be passed in this country. Not in my lifetime, which is why I speculated that it would happen, you know, several years into the future. And I felt like if they did do it, they would exclude so many people, and how could you possibly, I mean, I tried to write it as it actually happened, how people get excited about it, and I thought there would be this great divide because there are so many people who have many cultures in this country, and how can you prove that you're Black? Look at someone, is that, you know, how can you prove where I came from? I don't have, my family history, there aren't a lot of records. So that's sort of.
But in
what I
Esau's
came out
family,
with.
he has oral history, but what about, they were required, like, documented?
They required, yeah, I mean, I think I went to, they required, you know, documentation, and you have to prove it.
On both sides.
On both sides, or you only get a portion of it. So, if you're half white and half Black, you know, it's not good enough. You're not a full Black American. Things like that. And it was a hard story to come up with, but then it was fun after a while.
How did it enter your mind? When did the story first enter your mind?
Well, it was an assignment, and I always did because I really didn't want to write the story at all. And then I think it entered my mind, and I made a big separation between Harlem and Brooklyn, only because as someone who's not from New York, the way I would see it is I felt like, and it doesn't mean it's true, there were more Black Americans in Harlem, and where I lived in Brooklyn, everybody around me was West Indian, and people sometimes would make this joke, and so I thought, you know, I'm really going to take it to the extreme and make it so that everybody in Brooklyn in this story really is West Indian, everybody in Harlem really is African American, and what would happen. And I felt like if this would really happen, we might, I think we would almost turn against each other in that way.
Well, I never even thought that the way the transatlantic slave movement, covered all, the Caribbean and what have you, that they would not be included at all in this discussion of reparations. Like, that's one of the things that your story kind of brought out to me, that, wait a minute, you have people who've been in the country for generations. How wouldn't they be a part of this, discussion as well? If not even just Puerto Rico or, the Virgin Islands, but,
I know they find a way to cut. That's what we do. So if they were going to do that, they would find a way to make all sorts of loopholes and cut people out. Wow. Which I believe if ever would happen, which I don't think it would happen, then they would, because if it was going to happen, I think it
you
would have
skipped
happened
over the part
What part is that?
in the story where the people find out they're not eligible, which I thought was the most amusing part. So you'll have to read the book to get that part. Yes.
I like your story also because it has actually a contemporary note. Many years ago, when black folks walked down Eastern Parkway, when black folks walked down 125th Street, we all walked as black folks. And unfortunately now, there is a polarization among black folks, and people are quick to define themselves as A, B, or C. Whereas many years ago, if you had one drop of black blood, you were just black. And it has sort of weakened us. And there's even, and you see, like in Latino culture, you see them pulling together more, like Dominicans, whatever, and especially like on political scene. So I think that your story just even gives food for thought, even for a full-length novel. It just felt even what's going on today.
More homework.
Thank you. Yeah, that's true.
Have you gotten any negative feedback from?
No, I can't say. I haven't gotten any negative feedback. I mean, I don't know if someone would, actually give it to me, but I haven't gotten any negative feedback so far, anyway.
Any interesting, like, didn't expect to hear that.
There were. I remember I've been around some people who have argued because to say that, well, someone had said, and I was in the room, and they said, well, I don't think that people are West Indians should take advantage of reparations. And then someone else got very offended, and even in our class we had a discussion about it. And people, it's hard for some people to understand why this person should even be angry that he's not eligible for it. And some people feel like, it's a very valid argument.
Did you get any West Indian people with your face?
No, some were, my parents are American, but some of my friends, I have one friend in particular, and she didn't have any issue with it, but when she brought it up to her sister felt like, well, I'm from Jamaican descent, but I wouldn't have thought I would be eligible. But I don't know why that is, if she thought that. I didn't delve into it.
Well, yeah, I guess, like you were saying about West Indians being eligible, I guess they would be eligible, but from the nation that enslaved them,
Right.
they should be eligible from the British. That would be the problem, I guess. If the reparations are being paid by the United States, then I guess technically the United States wouldn't owe people who were enslaved in Jamaica because that was under the British, So it was only done by the United States where the bill is only introduced in the United States, because the British haven't introduced any bill to pay reparations to people of British West Indians or the Spanish, Puerto Rico, Cuba.
I guess it would depend on how you would define reparations. Because the way it was defined in the bill, the government, so to speak, this federal government, they were defining reparations based simply on whether or not your people in this country served as slaves. But there are several people, so that way, for instance, if my ancestors had been free slaves or free blacks, I wouldn't be eligible, even though the oppression and the racism somehow.
Yeah, that's what I don't understand. That if you were freed before the Emancipation Proclamation, why you would not be eligible? Because if you were slaves up until 1800, and then you were still, let's say you were freed after 1800, you still have like 200 years of your family working without.
I put on my government cap in the story.
And no matter what, and you were still, even if you lived as a freedman, you were still just as eligible to be lynched.
And again, if I had no money in my head, is you didn't suffer as much.
I want to throw something else out there.
I
want to throw something else out there because actually there are quite a few plantations who were worked by people of Caribbean descent. That's the thing that's what's so interesting about the Martin Delaney story from the 1850s. He recognized at that time period that it wasn't just American slavery, what have you, that slave owners would buy slaves from different places and bring them in, and then maybe generations on down they would, become African American. You wouldn't necessarily know, but they came from the Caribbean. Louisiana is a really good place to look at as far as that's concerned.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say to add to that, you're right, Sheree, that's why it's so ridiculous for there to be this divide about black Americans and Caribbean black people. 75% of the blacks who were brought to the United States as slaves were first in the Caribbean, then brought here. But of course, after a time, they became assimilated in, So it's really, the line is not that sharp as a lot of people now, for some weird reason, want to make like there is,
Well, what I think is so interesting about the story is that it does bring for discussion this idea of what does it mean to be black? What is this concept of blackness? How are we constantly renegotiating that, fighting about it?
Or do you mean African American?
I mean black because first of all, like the first collection has writers from the Caribbean, writers from Canada, writers from the UK. But when they talked about the book, it was always like African American. It was always African American. I think part of it is because as Americans, our tendency is to see everything from our shores. Everything is very American centric. So even when we're sitting there telling, no, Nalo Hopkinson is not American. Or Leon and Ross is not American. They couldn't really. What do you mean? They're all black, right? So so that's the whole thing. Mary Lou?
I just think it's interesting because this is about the colonization of race and culture. And when I was reading the story, I didn't get that initially, but now that I have a discussion, I was like, oh my. That's not that story. I have to read it again. I wanted to know about the research that you did on this story, about like the whole bill and operations and how you came up with S9861 and, you know, all that stuff.
Senate
You know,
bill.
Yeah.
To do the Senate part of it is because in a job that I used to have, it was really a lobbying organization. So I was just used to the way I had to track bills all the time in the way that they go through. So that's I don't like to do research. I try really hard not to do it. To be honest, I mean, I did a little bit, and we had talked about it in class, and we had articles, and we had different things, and you know, there were so many different websites that were out there in these different groups. Some that were talking about it strictly for the United States, but there were some that talked about it just overall, just from a global perspective. So.
Yeah. One of the things we talked about earlier before we started the reading was the Space Traders story by Derek Bell. And the thing that I thought was most interesting about his story was that he footnoted it and gave us like legal precedents for things that were happening in the story. And if you don't know, it's basically aliens come to the United States, come to the Earth and say, we'll solve all your economic problems, all your environmental problems, fill all, just take care of everything. If you will give us all of your citizens who are, black and have this certain amount of melanin. And you cannot ask us why we need this. You cannot ask us what we're going to do with them or where they're going. These are the terms, Okay, now deal with it. So, it sends the whole nation in this huge debate about what should happen, and Derek Bell's story is very disturbing, and you might have even seen like a short film adaptation of it. George Clinton hosted a film anthology called Cosmic Slop, and Robert Guillaume starred in the Derek Bell story, The Space Traders. But in it, he talked about in the footnotes of it, you'll learn that, of course, this is not some new concept in terms of what's our history as Americans. The Japanese, citizens were, taken from their homes, what have you, put in camps during the war.
And they did get paid.
And they received reparations.
The old
They received.
The very, 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 very old ones.
Somebody received
off.
reparations.
I worked with a man who was
Yeah.
not that old, and he received it when I was at, we knew that he received it. So.
They received
Not
it, and her
Robin.
families continue to receive. It wasn't like it was like a fun thing.
Yeah, they
So,
talked about
yeah.
it all the time.
So there is a precedent for that.
I could have footnoted.
Or maybe it was before they started.
I have to footnote it.
Or maybe it was before they were began to die off, but I just got the impression that they're getting pretty old there. Maybe they hope some of them will pass on before they get their check.
Well, that's some of the power of what speculative fiction can do. I mean, that's why I love it, because you can take contemporary things, as you were saying, contemporary concepts, and kind of reimagine it in other ways and take it further, That's what we try to do.
It was the best class I took in Frederick Douglass because there was.
Woohoo!
It was my first class and we had an open house and the different. I knew, I said, I know what I'm going to take. I'm going to take this class and this class. And then so I'm waiting and Cherie got up there and I said, I don't know what she's talking about, but I'm going to listen. And she started to talk about it and I was like, oh, I've been reading that for years and I never really thought about it. And I finally said, they finally allowed me to kind of approach some things in a way that I couldn't do with just, just regular fiction. So that's why it's so much fun. You don't have boundaries.
How did it feel to be published?
Oh, it was great. It was great. I was like, check, I've done this.
You read a prison?
Move on. I did. We read at a prison. They were the most engaging, intelligent audience. I don't think that to be facetious. It actually made me very sad.
It was
that they
really
were stuck there.
Yeah.
They were just phenomenal. And it was just heavy on my mind of the way there's so much good. It was my first time in a prison ever. So
Which one?
Eastern? Yeah, Eastern. And
Eastern Correctional.
Eastern Correctional Facility in Napanock, I think, New York.
About
100 miles outside.
Is it 2 hour drive or something?
I don't remember.
I don't know. It seemed like a long drive.
It was a
Yeah,
long
they're very
drive.
isolated.
How did they discuss? I'm just curious about their discussion about books.
Like any other audience, except that any of the questions that Cherie gave, they all would have known just like that.
They would have
They knew that we were there. They said, this is the year, and this is who did it, and they just knew.
They had the time, but not the resources. I mean, one of the things
That's
that
true.
they asked of us is if we could send books, and if we could send books to specific people, not necessarily just in general, because the guards take what they were told. The guards
That's true, yeah.
take what they want.
Because when we came with donated books, we brought books.
That was a whole other dynamic. We couldn't even get in the door good before they were already, asking if we were going to do our reading in Ebonics, which was how we were being greeted by the guards. And we were told that they were actually very good to us. That they were. So just to let you know how that went. So yeah.
Jill, since you reluctantly wrote about this topic, you did such a wonderful job in
Thank
doing
you.
it. what is going to be the next thing that you write on? Will you expound on this, or will you go to something else?
I didn't, you know what, I can say when I did this, I said, this is it right here. I mean, not that I wouldn't go back, but that's how I thought of it. Because Cherie, kept writing to me and saying the ending doesn't work, redo this, redo that, everything, redo it. I don't understand. She kept questioning me, but in a good way. And so I have some other speculative fiction pieces that I just don't know the ending to, that I have sort of, and I put them aside, pick them up. But the thing that I've been trying to work through right now is just for young adults.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jill. This is one of those writers that I start writing so I didn't have to do all this stuff. I just want to write on the page. You know what I mean? Talk in front of people, take pictures.
Cherie didn't tell me I was in the film, and I just would like to say that. Thank you.
All right, we have books here. Jill's going to sign them for you. And I'll sign them, and we have refreshments in the back. All right?
Gotta love it. All right.
Oh, they want to know what the price is.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you, sir. Yeah, the price of the book is $26. We take all forms of payment, even IOUs, checks, money orders. The goal is to really, I like to sell these books, and I guarantee you'll enjoy these books. So, thank you everybody for coming. Hope to see you again. I'm going to have a sign-in list. Put your email address on it, your mailing address if you don't have an email address. We're going to have another reading next month, April 13th, if I'm not mistaken. And it's going to be Brenda Thomas, author of Threesome, Foreplay, some other. She's actually got a few books out.
What's the name of the book?
The book that she most recently published is called Foreplay. April 13th. But if you have any questions, just take one of my business cards and email me in the back.
By the laptop and website.
By the laptop. And thanks again.
I'm going to write a check out there.
That will be to AALBC.
All right, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Hey.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to, before you all roll out, I just wanted to make some announcements. Some of you probably already know this. I'm editing a third volume of Dark Matter. The theme is on Africa. So if you know any great writers who, they don't have to be African, though I am working with some African contemporary writers on this, but I'm looking for stories that are somehow related to Africa, the African community. It could be environmental. We have all this genetically modified food that they are giving to farmers in Africa and in India as well, and here. Other things, whatever that you think might be of interest to readers. That's what I'm working on now, and it's a collection called Gourd Songs, Story from the Tree of Life, which is short stories, not genre specific. So that's what I'm working on. And I want to make an announcement about Sankofa. Sankofa here, this is a scholar and a noted collector whose works right? Thank you. His work is in Schaumburg. It's been on tour. He has been a consultant on many wonderful things. He has a website called slavehistory.org. All right? And you brought some work?
Brought some
things here. Some artifacts. He just got some new things from Black Panthers. Some amazing things on voodoo. Voodoo tales, literature, just some really wonderful stuff. So I want you to talk to each other because there's some very interesting, all of you are interesting, fabulous, amazing people, and we want you all to, connect and to talk about what you're doing. So thank you for coming.